I'm going to use this doodle here from my sketchbook, and instead of freehanding and trying to put that directly on my bowl, I'm going to create an image transfer. So using regular tracing paper, I can place that tracing paper on top of my design. And you can draw directly on the tracing paper. You can also draw directly on your pot if you'd like. And I'm going to use a pencil. You could use any tool that will make a mark and trace over the basis of your design here. I'm now going to apply black slip using a soft brush. My clay is not quite ready. It's still very much in the leather hard stage. You should wait until it's just past leather hard to try this. It still worked for me, but I'll be able to show you why in a later clip. It's not an ideal stage. I'm going to apply lots of underglaze because my clay body is still leather hard. I'm going to do at least 4 or 5 coats. And you can use underglaze, you can use slip. You just want to make sure that the color you're using creates a really high contrast between the body color of your clay when it's fired, which is why a lot of artists use black because it's an awesome contrast with white. So I'm going to apply lots of coats and I'm going to wait for it to dry so that I can touch it and not make a fingerprint. And when it's dry, I can put my design, I cut it out so it's easier for me to manage, and I can place that into the bowl wherever I want my design to go. And I'm simply going to press on top of my lines to create an impression in the clay. I don't do every little line here. I just do the big shapes so that I have a roadmap to follow. And I tried to get a good camera angle to show you, but you can't see, but there is an impression there that I can now follow. I use this thing I call the dental tool. I use linoleum cutters. I use ribbon tools or loop tools. And I use a big fluffy brush to brush away the crumbs. As you scratch your design into this using whatever tools you see fit, you're going to periodically use that brush, that big fluffy brush, to dust off the crumbs. This is where you can tell if you're in the right stage or not. If your crumbs don't brush away easily, mine were not, that tells me that my clay is too wet and you're going to kind of get a muddy mess. It still worked, but it definitely would have been easier if my clay had been a little bit more like dust when I went to brush it off. You don't want your clay to get too dry or else you're going to be pulling kind of big chunks out of it. So you want it to be just past the leather hard stage. It still feels cool to touch. So at this point, I start working to remove some white shapes. You're working to create a balance between the black and white, so there's not an overwhelming amount of black and a tiny little white line scratched in. Another thing to sort of pay attention to is I'm kind of going with the flow here, and I'm adding a lot of things I hadn't added into my drawing. So sometimes you just kind of get in the ebb and flow of things. And if you have a banding wheel, that would have been very helpful for this. I did not have a banding wheel at home, so I'm doing this kind of having to spin the pot on my own, but a banding wheel would be another really helpful thing to use here. I'm just kind of pulling out lines and patterns where I see fit.